it's a good thing that the children are going back to school. I guess as parents, we are all excited by the fact that they can go back to class to learn, to be able to grow in their chosen fields that they have chosen to study. So I think there is a bit of excitement. But we're also coming out of a very unprecedented times. The last 2 years have been tough. They have been tough. Many parents have lost work. Many parents have had pay cuts. Parents who are business owners have seen drops in their businesses. So there is certainly a financial strain on the majority of families. And that financial strain will manifest in this January when you have 3, 4, 5 children going back to school at the same time. And you should remember that in our structure as a country, you are not only looking after your children. People are paying school fees for nephews, for nieces. And so when you look at that bill and the requirement, and on top of the fact that you can't use the uniform you used 2 years ago, on top of the fact that some of the books have disappeared, sometimes even the suitcases have disappeared. So that has caused this January to be really a tough time, because it's a big cost coming out of a time which has been really tough. So many parents are kind of negotiating to see how they can walk through this complex period. When you look at both the schools and the parents, both these parties have been going through this situation. And I'll talk about the schools first. I think schools have gone through an unprecedented period. If someone told you 3 years ago that a school would spend 2 years closed, you'd say it's impossible. How can that happen? But we have just seen it happen. And not just 1 or 2 schools, but all schools. That means that this entire sector, the education sector, has been constrained in unprecedented ways. Some schools had credit with financial institutions. A number of financial institutions have come out to help and ease that tension. But those facilities still remain. Some facilities were being rented, they have been taken by the people who were renting them out. So the the education sector is coming out of a very difficult period. And yet we wanted to be prepared to receive our children and start teaching. So I think that most school administrators are really fighting for survival right now. How can I get this school open? How can I be able to start off? And you'll find that as they battle to find those resources, quite a bit of this responsibility has been shifted to the parents, because possibly run your bank for a facility, the bank says you are so much in credit, so much in debt, we can't help you. So you say, let me try to push to the parents. Now, that forces us to be parents, because as I mentioned earlier, also the parents have been going through exactly the same situation. Some of them are out of work, some of them have been struggling during this period. So what I think needs to happen is a conversation for how do we get the ship moving. And I think that's the conversation which schools have to have with their parents, to say that, you know what, this is the position we are in. We want your child to start school, but the truth is that I have no food in the stores and I need to make sure I buy some food so that the children can have something to eat. That conversation needs to happen. And I think it would be helpful if this conversation is candid. It shouldn't be sit with your parents, if you try to communicate to them and tell them honestly that we need to get this ship going and this is how we are going to get it going. I think as parents, we receive that news sometimes with weight. It's quite a heavy weight. I mean, if you are struggling to get the fees together, and then the requirements bill seems as though it's the same as the fees, certainly there will be a bit of pushback. But I think that we need to have a balanced conversation about this. One thing which we need to appreciate is that education is quite expensive. It's quite expensive, and some of these things are necessary. They are essential for the child to be able to learn. And if they are, irrespective of the cost structure the school chooses to have, some schools will charge high fees and provide some of the things. Some schools will charge low fees and say bring these requirements. But I think that is just a decision at the level of the school. But the question is that we need to ask ourselves what absolutely is essential in here. And I think all parents are going through this kind of conversation to look through that list and say, is this absolutely essential? And to the extent you can actually have that conversation even with the school and say that, you know what, I feel like this I can only deliver in a month's time, but let the young man start, I've paid the fees, this I might be able to deliver. And I believe that school administrators should also receive that news and say, how can we be able to balance this? You don't need all the brooms on the first day. Possibly you'll use the ones which have arrived. But the point is that I think those conversations need to happen, because all of us want the education sector to start. The administrators want, the private schools have invested lots of money, even government has invested lots of money in these schools. So the point is that we want that sector to start. But what we need absolutely now is to make sure that we get going. You want that child to start going to school. And I think we look at that list and say, what is essential, what is desirable? And if something is desirable, you say, this, I think, let's see if we can provide it in a month or two. This is absolutely essential. Let's be able to get there. If you're a school owner or a school administrator, it's important to rethink everything. To rethink everything. You want to ask yourself, what do I absolutely need? You want to go to your cost structure and look at it and say, how can I make this more efficient? Why? You have to make that cost structure more efficient to allow to set a price in the market which can be accessed by the parents who are going through a very complex period of time. So you want to say, which areas of wastage have I been having as a school? Is there wastage in stationery? And how can I stop that? Are there papers I am printing that I shouldn't print anymore? Should I set up a WhatsApp group for communication instead of having to send out a circular? Those are questions which have to be had by every school administrator. Why? Because if you reduce your prices, you may just be able to give us the school fees that we had before COVID. But when you look at it from the perspective of the parents, for most of us, we have to appreciate that education is going to be one of our biggest costs. And it's simply because of the structure of the nation. 7 to 8 of every 10 Ugandans are below the age of 25. So chances are high they're in some kind of education. So if you are two adults, a father and a mother, you should know that in the Ugandan averages, you are looking after about 5 to 6, 7 people. And that's just a reality. And that reality means that when you are looking at education, you need to know that there is going to be a weight which has to be carried. And you're asking that, how do I prioritize it? Because all of us as parents, we can be able to appreciate that education is a worthwhile investment, especially for your child. Because your child will need that education to make it in the world. And we can debate the education, but at least they need a decent education. So since we know that that is important, then as parents, we need to make sure, how can we prioritize it? And then you have to say, which changes can I make? Because there is also efficiency on the parent side. You might be having to travel for 1.5 hours to go to school every day. Now the question is, do I want to change where I stay so that I get closer to the school, so that I can be able to reduce the cost? Now that might mean higher rent for you, but that debate has to be had, and you have to sit down and punch the numbers and ask yourself, how can I be able to reduce this school expense?